Thank you. So my talk is going to be a little bit different to all the others that we've heard so far. I want to start where I started off with this topic. When Tom asked me if I'd like to come and speak, he asked me about some problems that we may have in athletic development. And at the time, there was one thing that came straight into my mind. I think it was just luck that was at the time. So the question which I was pondering is, how do our coaching choices affect the opportunity for our players to achieve their potential? So that's kind of the overarching question that's going to come throughout. I'm going to talk a bit of a case study about what I have done to consider this within my coaching practices. And that's basically what I just want to kind of leave you with as you're thinking through and maybe apply to your own practice. So this is Fulham Academy's sports science mission statement. Quite interesting for you to potentially see the differences between this and the Chelsea mission statement. It's different ways of doing things, and Chelsea produce some phenomenal athletes, but our perspective is probably slightly different. The things that I've highlighted here are that we want to drive self-reliant players that play with pace and intensity and motivation. Maybe a bit more of a psych element in there, but we see that these things will facilitate staying on the pitch. This is paraphrasing our mission statement slightly, but this kind of, at the start of the season, we've got a new head of department, John Goodwin, who used to be a lecturer here as well, and he's very much driving this moving forwards. And it kind of stuck with me that we have these structures, certainly for me, that we as a kind of new practitioner and gaining experience, that we latch onto and we go to prescribe what we're doing. We're a big advocate of movement literacy at Fulham as well. That's the fundamental, most important aspect. Movement competency is key. It's not directly in contradiction, but there is, I think, a contradiction in terms that we know from a strength and conditioning perspective that progressive overload develops athleticism. Now, we can develop and we can overload in different ways. Overload isn't just load, it can be through complexity. But one of the things I was noticing in my time working in the YDP is that we were making massive improvements in the under-13s, under-14s year with the physical development of our players, which felt to me like it was stagnating through the 15s and 16s year. And I was thinking about why this potentially was, and I think it's because as a coach I was sticking quite rigidly to these structures, but these structures impose limitations because they have endpoints, they have categorical sections for you to develop. And when I spoke with John, I kind of reflected on this and thought a lot of the science that backs these up is really strong, but it's based on averages. So, I mean, if anybody's seen me lecture before, they've seen this graph because I think it's an excellent piece of work. The references may be plopped off of there, but the graph on the top is the long-term youth athletic development model by Rodri Lloyd and John Oliver at Cardiff Met. It's really, really useful, and it's guided by chronological age and biological maturation, and you can see that there's emphasis on different things at different time here as one structure, and then the other structure here below is kind of the progressive overload for different training goals. So we know strength, we want to do X, power, hypertrophy, and we want to do Y. So we have these structures, and we implement them to help our players. They need that support. We provide the scaffolding to help them to develop, but at the same time, like I say, those structures create limits. So I thought about how I could solve this problem, and the first thing that I wanted to do was go and talk to some different people. So when I spoke to John, he gave me some advice about looking into using reps in reserve as a potential tool to prescribe training load and volume. Again, there's some references here that you can go away and potentially look at that will give you a better description of what this is. But we're essentially using exactly the same prescription models that were in the UKSEA guidelines that I showed you there for developing strength or hypertrophy. But instead of us doing repetition max testing to provide percentages to prescribe to players, we're trying to install things and live our mission statement to drive self-reliance, but still drive pace and intensity and motivation that's intrinsic to our players. One way that we can do that and provide ownership is by allowing players to self-regulate their intensity. So what these repetitions and reserves suggest is, I want you to do 4 sets of 6, classic strength-based exercise, but I want you to select a weight where once you've done it, you only feel like you only have 2 more left in the tank. If you've only got 2 more left in the tank, then we can be reasonably comfortable that you're working at the same percentage of your 1 rep max that would elicit these strength gains. Got to be careful when working with young athletes is the fact that this research is developed in trained individuals who will know their bodies a lot better. Me personally, my philosophy, I'm happy with that. I'm happy with helping them to understand their bodies and the feelings of them developing more. There is research that supports that this is a valid training tool. So this is kind of one way that I've tried to impose another structure on top of structures that we have that will give some flexibility. And I think we've seen some really good outcomes from this in the fact that we've definitely seen greater ownership over individuals' progression within their strength and conditioning programs. We still provide the program for them. We still have a structured progression that we work on from a movement competency perspective. But this allows the players to not come up to me and go, Ed, can I lift more now? What should I lift at the start of every session? Players know what they're lifting, and they have that as an intrinsic goal that they come to the session. It's not based on what anybody else is doing. It's just on what they've been lifting. This has definitely resulted in an increased training intensity within our under 15s and our under 16s age groups. The challenges that it has imposed is that we've got a really good cohort of players, and they want to push, but we've almost had a flip of the problem now. Instead of having beautiful moving athletes who aren't progressively overloading with something complexity or weight, we're starting to see players who seeing other people lift a bit heavier than them and they want to catch up. So the next part of this for me is to find a way that we can still keep an eye on players and encourage them to progress without them progressing too quickly. And it's finding that balance between movement competency, which is very important for developing athletes, and also progressive overload, and trying to be in line with our mission statement. That's all I've got to say. Those are the references. I think the slides and stuff will go out. And yeah, thank you.